And we had already sort of talking about just general introductions. I might as well go ahead and continue with that, sort of just where we are. We here in Virginia are just coming off our fall break, and so sort of getting back into our groove, for for better or for worse. And I actually was just up your way, Katie. I was at Hamlin for a couple days, doing an external review, and that's always fun for me to do because I come back with a whole bunch of like ideas that I might want to employ. So
you should have said something like, we could have had a Palm hangout. Me, Sue, you could have been like a little mini Palm.
I was so tired. You would not have enjoyed my company. You know how these things work. They keep you moving place to place to place. Katie, how about you?
Yeah, so I sat at University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Just a little bit about my teaching experience that might make this somewhat relevant is I have been working with undergrads for 10 years, but over the last year and a half, pretty much all of COVID, I have actually been on a grant that's working with biomanufacturing professionals, which has been great because it's been really flexible. I haven't been tied to a semester schedule. I've done a lot of online teaching because of it, but our ability to shift and move has been much more lenient. So I've felt very privileged because of that. But yeah, I was a Palm Fellow, and I really should look it up. I honestly can't remember, 4 years ago.
Been a minute,
like
yeah.
Yeah, I was a Palm Fellow, and now I just never leave.
And we appreciate that. Zach, how about you?
Hi, I'm Zach. I teach at the College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota, and I teach generally Gen Chem and Biochem, although my Palm project is about a chemistry, it involves a chemistry and sustainability class that I taught, and the project happened last spring, although I still really value my interactions with Palm. It's been a wonderful networking, and I'm a fellow, not the mentor. I get the, and I really like Palm. It's been a great collaboration. Somebody I met through Palm, we actually just published a paper together, which has been wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
So it's all these really cool connections that I would not have otherwise made, and so it's been a really wonderful opportunity.
Wonderful.
And then, and then just one more. I serve on the Equal Access Committee here at CSS, and so this paper, when I first read it, I sent it over to the Access folks, and they're all stoked about it. So it's a really good paper, and it's something that I was really excited to share. So thank you for bringing it. Mike, do you pick the papers?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for this one. This was Carlos Scholar at NC State suggested it for us, and so he gets the credit.
Well, props to him. I told him you picked it, so there you go. But anyway, it's a really cool paper, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
And then Mariana.
Yes, I'm Mariana Burks. I'm an actual Palm mentor.
Nice.
And so this is my first year. I was approached by a few applicants wanting to be a mentee.
Nice.
So that was like, where you all get my name from?
Doing something right, yeah.
I was like,
Sue Wick is giving out your name.
I was like, okay, how did this happen? So at any rate, I'm at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm an intro biology instructor. I also am a science specialist for our TRIO programs here at our university. So I actually do work in a capacity with SSD in terms of understanding how students need to have their accommodations made through the course itself. So it was interesting actually in terms of, again, I do the active engagement pedagogy in my classes. But I think the other thing that, sometimes you don't realize is probably not true access in terms of how you are aligning your own pedagogy with what you think you're actually meeting the students' needs. So I'm really actually pretty excited about talking about more of those realizations. So yeah, I'm excited to meet you all.
Let me go ahead and pull up the more of an essay than a paper, but very interesting thing, like I'd mentioned that Carlos Scholar had selected for us with respect to thinking about DEI stuff, but from a different perspective than I think we're used to thinking of it from, a different population than we're used to thinking of it from. The idea of ableism and the idea of how to present your classes in a way that are accessible to people regardless of potential disabilities. And so I was struck right with the beginning of how the student introduction or potential for student introduction was laid out for us. I am at a more conservative institution where we're still grappling with the pronoun question, let alone the accessibility question. So I had a hard time picturing doing this myself, but then I also appreciate you probably have to build a culture up for this sort of thing to become part of your standard practice. The idea that people would be comfortable sharing their accesses. Maybe this isn't a public setting, but like if you presume you're doing this in a classroom, for instance, that you would develop a culture that was safe enough that people would feel okay describing these sort of things just as part of your introduction. So maybe that's a good starting point. Just your own institutions, where are you guys at in terms of thinking about these questions?
I think the thing that I have with my students and how they may reveal what they need accommodations for has really been centered around mental health. Mm-hmm. It hasn't necessarily been those disabilities that are seen.
And that's the one kind I'm used to in class, yeah.
But the disabilities that are unseen. Mm-hmm. So I do active engagement. I do form teams with my 100+ course students. And I have students that have actually said, Ms. Burks, with my anxiety, that's a lot for me. So I also teach a smaller section that is focused on the trio students. And so I've actually made the accommodation for those students. If they would like to sit in with the smaller section, it mirrors the exact content and information that's being delivered in the larger section. Mm-hmm. So I think that first, really listening to what the students are saying that they need and being flexible in what we can provide has been the best means for me to actually do something about it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, Mike, I was also struck by sort of the introduction and thinking of if I were a student who used, I have a hard time like asking everybody to do that type of introduction. It seems really personal. And I have in the past done things, like before the first day of class where you ask a bunch of information, what are your pronouns, which ones do you want me to use in class or email or whatever. I have asked accessibility questions, but they certainly have not been as well framed in the unseen ones. But I just don't know that I could. I think I would be comfortable standing up front and being like, hello, my name is, Professor Furness, my pronouns are, and sharing my needs. Like, for example, you may have noticed that I'm standing up right now and wiggling. I have a hard time sitting still. Not because I'm diagnosed with anything, but just I spend all day in this room. Who can sit still all day? And so I feel like I would be very comfortable sharing this type of sentence with my students in the hopes of building relationship and instructor intimacy, signaling that I want to hear their same info if they are willing to share. But I cannot imagine doing sort of like a go around small group thing. That makes me really uncomfortable, that I would be putting people on the spot. And I get the idea of normalizing the conversation, and that's why I think this pre-semester survey type thing is helpful. And I think me saying it would be helpful, but I would not, I don't think I could ever ask students to say it unless they wanted to share it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that comes up in this paper that I think is really interesting is that sort of you think, and we talk about with active learning, the positivity in doing small group activities and bringing people into small group activities, but then upon reading this, sort of the reflection that we could inadvertently be doing some of our students a disservice with some of those very same activities. And so that certainly made me think, right, about the balance of how to allow people access, but also to maximize student engagement. And they don't have to be exclusive, of course, but you certainly have to be deliberate in how you're going to employ that. Zach, I didn't give you a chance to.
That's good. There's actually a brilliant segue because it was I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the page. What page is that? 20 ES 85. Is that page 5? It's hard to tell. I think it's page 5. The synchronous virtual meeting thing, because this is something that has been a compelling issue for me for the last year and a half of this just fiasco. I teach Gen Chem, and Gen Chem is not particularly discussion based, and so having teaching synchronously on my iPad for online and in person doesn't really adversely affect me. I can do that, and it doesn't really change my lecture style. Fine. And so last fall, I had where students could just come if they wanted. It was basically high flex. They could come if they wanted online. They could be in person if they wanted. So I was like, look how accessible I'm being. I'm providing all this thing, and I thought I was being super progressive. Except that for a lot of 18-year-old freshmen, they needed more structure than that, and a lot of them simply stopped coming to class, and then their grades suffered because they didn't have the executive functioning. Not to blame them, I wouldn't have either, to put on their pants and come to class in the morning. And so I actually had provided them too much structure. I had provided them too much freedom, not enough structure for them to find success. So this fall, I'm trying to find the happy medium there, which is I don't just want everyone to come to class all the time. I don't want to require that because maybe they have a thing, right? Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they're not comfortable. Maybe who knows what. So I do I do gatekeeping Zoom, where they have to ask me for the link, and they don't have to tell me why, but they have to actually email me and say, what's the Zoom link for today? And it's not hard. It's not much. They don't have to provide a medical reason or a personal reason, but it's just that email is enough that it keeps the people who should be coming to class in class, and then it allows for the people that might not want to come to class that day can do it. And so I think that it is working. My class attendance is much better, and then there's always a couple of people on Zoom, and I think it's working exactly, hopefully, like I'm hoping it will. And so it's trying to find the medium between accessibility and structure because a lot of people simply learn better in the classroom setting, and they need to be told to get to the classroom setting.
Thank you for that.
I will also say, I think too, it's kind of interesting. You could tell the students who really do need the accommodation and how we are flexible enough to meet those needs. But then there are a few students who take advantage of, their situations. And so they just don't do anything. They don't do the coursework. They don't try, in terms of meeting the expectations to be successful in their academics. So I think that, sometimes we don't want to be taken advantage of either. In terms of, we in academia, there's expectations that come with academia because there's another level to responsibility that we expect our students to have. Mm-hmm. So I think that there should be another side to what this is indicating in terms of access for our students. But also, I think the follow-up paper needs to reflect on students who may take advantage of need or requesting the access, but still don't fulfill the requirements of the course.
Yeah, it's always such a hard line. I mean, both of you, Zach and Mariana have been stating, where we want to lower any sort of barriers preventing our students from having their education, right? Which we want all of our students to have, but at the same time, still providing the support and structures that they really do need. And especially if you're talking about your 18-year-old, right? I love the way you said, put your pants on and come, because I'm sure we're all thinking of the fact that, like, I don't know, when I was a college student, I at least was wearing jeans when I came, right? And now it's just like sweatpants and yoga pants. And you're just like, I have seen slippers, like literally their bedroom slippers. I'm just like, what is happening? So, their executive functioning, or their ability to motivate. In all reality, that is a side effect of some neurodiverse people as well, right? Is that those types of functions are a challenge. So, like, how do we balance flexibility with supports and accountability? Is quite the challenge as well.
And I know from where I'm sitting, the single biggest challenge I have with respect to this kind of work would be, we've had a striking increase in people on some level of the autistic spectrum in our classrooms. And I have sort of tried to learn as I've gone about best accommodations, but like, it is certainly a case-by-case basis in many cases, with degree of functionality, degree of comfort, that it's, I'm not speaking some novel thing to you guys about it not being a monolith, right? But just how one addresses this is a challenge that I have wrestled with. And so I appreciate that in the context of this paper as well.
Yeah.
So here's table one. And in our it was me and then a couple other people in our last discussion as well, we're all drawn to anti-capitalist politics, because it's like, oh wow, we're just getting right out there, aren't we? And then you read that and it's not what it means. It's like our visceral American, oh crap, like that can't be right. But then what they're talking about is the idea of everything being a competition, or everything being related to whoever does the most wins. And so I wouldn't have thought of calling that capitalist, but yeah, I see where they're going for there, right? The idea of not holding a universal standard to everybody, the idea of fostering cooperation as opposed to competition, or maybe something that's healthier in terms of competition, if that's the way you want to go. But we have certainly spent in our last couple discussions disproportionately, and I'm aiding and abetting this, of course, disproportionately looking at that particular principle just because it leaps off the page to me. But we can also talk about the idea of interdependence, the idea, the collective ideas that are at the bottom of everybody functioning and working together, that everybody does better when there's a collective responsibility. So sort of as a next phase here, I was wondering if people wanted to consider the ideas that are on here for disability justice and the ones that may strike them as most related to their particular activities in the classroom.
I was gonna say, I think when it says the interdependence,
yeah,
rejecting colonial notions of interdependence, that colonialism is basically ingrained in higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
I just the expectation of what academia is intended to represent as a scholarship is colonialism. I mean, that is hard to untether in terms of what is expected of students as a scholar.
I'm not as familiar with this, so for clarification, by colonial, do they mean I have all the knowledge, you have none of the knowledge, and this is the way you are dependent on me? Do I have that kind of right?
Yes, I think. Oh yeah, in terms of yeah, probably so.
Yeah, I'm just curious. How would you mind trying to define it in the way you're describing it, just so I understand?
I'm describing it in terms of Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. I got you now. Yes. Yes, basically that hierarchy of knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, oh, yes. I think the other thing is that we as professors have mastered the information and content. And so there's a huge gap with what that level of knowledge is for students as opposed to what is in the scholarship of the professor. So I think, again, I like that one in terms of the interdependence, because again, each student has their own pace in which they're going to work at to have a better understanding of mastering their program or their discipline.
And by the same, go ahead, Kate.
Oh, my understanding of sort of this concept of colonialism and how it has impacted, well, most structures in general, right? But academia certainly is the idea of the Western way of knowing, right? How do we know science? How do we know life as being very Western focused, whereas those that would take a more Afrocentric or indigenous people's view would have a different way of describing what we know about the living world.
Okay.
And so I think that that's also one of the pieces that they're bringing up there, that especially with the concept there of connecting it to independence, right? Like one person, right, an individual has scientific freedom or academic freedom, right? That their accomplishments and merits are theirs, right? Versus thinking of how we work, well, interdependently with humans, but also with our environment to build other ways of knowing, and that we don't need to reduce everything down to facts, right? That things work in wholes.
It sounds like there's the anti-capitalist part there as well. It's not all about you. It's about the broader sense of knowledge that's out there.
Yeah,
that's interesting. These are new ideas for me, so I'd be curious to discuss like how one actually employs these. Zach, how about you?
I mean, this is like the base of my teaching is in classes like Gen Chem and Biochem, where these topics are not explicitly mentioned just because they don't come across our desk very often. Although they should more. And in courses like sustainability, we address these things more readily. And our campus has an ongoing argument about just the very phrase "ways of knowing." So, Katie, I thought it was funny when you said that, because ways of knowing and the fact that there could be multiple ways of knowing, some people are very fond of that, and some people find it an extremely offensive or challenging term. Anyway, and so we've been fussing about that for 3 years. We argue about it about virtually every faculty assembly, and it's so I was like, oh dear, there it goes.
It's like a higher grade faculty assembly than we have. I'll tell you that.
Do you pick up the grab the philosophers and sociologists and like sit them down next to the STEM people and be like, ha ha ha?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Right. They just argue with each other. But no. So this is. I mean, these things are things that I think I try to. I mean, I try to talk. I mean, I try to focus. I try to implement things about DEI, but I don't so explicitly think about DEI in terms of like what access am I doing for folks who might have challenges to their ability to, who as this paper said might be facing certain disabilities. And so I don't think I'm as explicit about that as I should, and I think that I need to be. I think that there are some things, and again, I know I'm just jumping around the paper, but there are some things that really stuck out at me later down on page 8 now, where I do a mid-semester evaluation, and I've never asked if anyone's access needs are being met. Right? I've never asked that question. Super important question, right? Really easy question to ask, right? Are your course access needs being met? I've just never done it. I've never thought about it. I just sort of assumed that they were, or I hoped that they were. But I mean, these are things that I think I could be a lot more explicit about and do better in my classroom.
Can I ask, do your institutions have the SSD office?
which stands for?
Services for students with disabilities.
We have an equal access office, which I assume is basically the same thing.
Yes,
Yes.
but I think we do, but it's not called that. And I think it's probably lumped in, like, I don't think we have an office, and because we're a small institution too, dedicated solely to that. And I think that it encompasses a lot of different just access issues for a variety of different communities.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, I think any institution that's receiving federal funding for institution support, it's required.
Okay. I hope we have them.
If you've ever had an accommodations letter from a student,
Right.
look and see where that letter came from.
See
and
where the
that's most
letter's
likely-
coming from.
Yeah, that's your office.
Yeah, I knew
Mhm.
that. So that usually gets processed through our Orwellian named academic success office, because that's like where the people who have trouble with academic success go. But that's largely for learning disability type things.
Yeah.
If it's something else related to like a physical need or an accommodation in that sense, I haven't seen as much of that. So I'm not sure if that's the same people or if that would be somebody else.
It's probably, at least I worked at a smaller institution prior to the University of Minnesota, and it was the same one. I think the reason you get a lot of different names is because we went through that period where the term disabled, right, was like, ooh, should we use that term? And also people were afraid that because of the stigma with it, that students who really should be using the office wouldn't come because they're like, I'm not disabled, right? And so I think a lot of those types of offices got different names because of that. And so I think that's one of the big things there. I was, well, not to make you jump around too much, Mike, but it was at the bottom of page 3, the same one of the table you were on. There was a statement in there that I thought, one, belongs in my syllabus. And you should just copy and paste it right on over. It's on the bottom left there. It says, a space can be considered accessible if it provides individuals with everything that they need to fully participate in the space or activity. And I was like, well, that should just like go in the syllabus, right? Because that includes all the other stuff that this paper touched on, right? Like, for example, I don't care if my students eat during class.
Right.
Do I state that every semester and reinforce it a couple of times, maybe, because maybe it didn't, they thought, well, she just said that, right? You know, do I, you know, what about bathrooms, right? Like, you literally just get up and walk out. I don't care. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to wait. You don't need permission. Just leave. But like, you know, so thinking about all of those pieces and how that connects with what Zachary was saying, in terms of also checking in early on in the semester, you know, doing something a couple weeks in to say like, am I meeting your access needs? Or is this course and the structure meeting your access needs? You know, like if you need to stand up, you know, sure, you can sit in the back and you can just stand up there whenever you want, as evidenced by the person standing right now, right? Like this, I liked the way it very clearly stated, we all have needs. It's just for some of us, our needs have been normalized as the default acceptable needs, and for other people, it hasn't, right? And so I liked this idea of sort of, well, like I said, I'm going to copy and paste that right into a syllabus and then use that to build in the future. And I think that that's really important. You know, right in that same spot where you put the link to your whatever your office is called for access needs. I think it's important to do that. Which I just wanted to, it's not really a point of discussion, just to share. I don't know if you guys have the PowerPoint version. There is a version of PowerPoint that has transcription, live transcription. And I have been using it for over a year now, and it's pretty good, even with weird science words. It does a pretty good job. And so I like that in terms of not only for students that are hard of hearing or deaf, but also, you know, English as a second language. And it could potentially be helpful for students, you know, who, I don't know, I guess it could be distracting for others, but I can imagine it might also help focus some, right, on the text to maintain that attention as needed. But anyway, just wanted to point it out that there are versions of PowerPoint with transcription built in.
Well, thank you for that. So, Yvonne, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I do have something that I would love to discuss,
Yeah,
but it
please.
doesn't have to be right now. I would love to talk about labs.
Oh, yeah. Do that.
As a place of challenge in terms of equity of access. And I'm really just wanting to bring it up as a subject and don't have a specific question.
I am trying to think of how our institution accommodates students who have the physical disability that may be, you know, in a wheelchair or may have limited movement. So again, because of, you know, the federal requirement to accommodate those students, the lab coordinators have to find a way to actually make that accommodation possible. We have a graduate student, again, who is wheelchair bound. And I think that, again, they had to bring in the director for SSD, they had to have the lab coordinators there, they had the faculty person who is the advisor for that student, and they had to walk through and physically look at everything that could be reasonably in place for that student. So it's a process, but even if it's still a limitation for the student, they, you know, again, what's available in the lab as opposed to how to make that accessible, you know, it could just be simple as moving things around, allowing that student accommodation to be able to come in on their own, you know. So I think, again, it is difficult and there is limitations, but I think as long as the department is doing everything that they can and the student feels like that accommodation is being made, even if it's limited, it's still better than no accommodation being made.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how often students with you know, that type of physical disability just don't go into STEM because it feels like, how am I going to do the lab? You know, so that by the time they make it into our class, or by the time they make it to undergraduate education, they've already ruled it out.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that because before they even get into the scholarship of what they want to pursue, they probably say it's just too much. I know that I can't do the things that everyone else can do. And so they feel that limitation and probably say, you know, it might be easier to go on humanities. It might be easier, you know, to go into art, you know. So I think you're probably right.
And actually, I noticed that both the authors, when they described their own status, both went into math. And I was like, oh, because math doesn't have labs, right? And I think they both said that theirs were physical disabilities, if I remember correctly. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense, right? Math doesn't have labs. So, yeah.
It's really interesting. And do you get a sense, I don't know if you've gotten to talk to individuals like in those situations, but like, is it that they really liked those other disciplines and they realized they just couldn't do them? Or did they actually come to, and that's not to disparage math, right? But just did they come to math because they really liked it, or because that's where they saw they were most likely to be able to make a contribution?
No idea.
Yeah.
So, Katie, this issue of lab accessibility is one. We're a small institution. We're poor. We're basically broke, right? Go figure. And you know, so our labs are set up such that like I can easily utilize them, right? A 6-foot person's like, no problem, man, this is easy. But any person that is facing any other possible issue has a really hard time with it. And On occasion, we fuss about it a little bit, and then we don't have any money, so we can't redo. I mean, millions of dollars spent to redo labs, and so when a student either with like a again, I don't know the right PC term, and I apologize if I'm being offensive, but like a permanent disability, or a temporary one, like broke their leg, is in one of our labs. It's happened twice. And both times we either put them in a different room where we could have more access, or like we could fiddle with things more than we could in the lab setting, or we just provided everything for them, and it was never satisfactory. And we sort of just hoped that the student didn't make too much noise about it, because if they actually were particular about it, then we would get in a lot of trouble. But we didn't know. It's just been a mess, and sort of, I will readily admit, we sort of swept it under the rug and just hoped that the student wouldn't complain, because we did not know what to do, and we've never been able to take a progressive move towards it. And every time we think about it, it's just we can't afford it, which I realize is a false equivalency, because saying that in any other setting is like, we can't afford to build a wheelchair ramp is like, I mean, that doesn't fly, right? But then all of a sudden, if it's in a classroom setting, we're like, yeah, we can't really do that. Sorry, hope you don't fuss about it too much. So it's a long-standing, consistent issue, and we have absolutely no solution to it other than treat the student way, way differently than every other student, which itself creates a whole bunch of inequities.
Yeah, and so much of this, sort of like what I mentioned before with the autism cases, so many of this is case by case, that just those of us, I think most of us in this call are at smaller institutions, just like what are the what can we situationally do, sort of like what you're describing, Zach, what can we situationally do to help people, but also are we robust enough, are we nimble enough to be able to make those adaptations when necessary? And I suppose that's where Mariana, you mentioned the offices, that's where like the office would come into play. That's where being very proactive about that sort of stuff would come into play. Go ahead. All right, you went on. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, I think I realized the scope of what I didn't know from under, in terms of here we are trying to engage our students. We're just trying to make the best of it. We really just trying to make sure everyone feels included. And then we have this real understanding of those students who don't fall within the center of what we think we're trying to do, what is, the right thing to do. And I think that is really eye-opening, because I don't want to be that professor that's saying, hey, let me know if you really need me to do anything for you for your accommodation. Most of the time, students are hesitant about having to speak out about, a disability or something that makes them different. And so it's hard to balance what is the right thing to do, because some students say, no, I might have a disability, but I don't want to be identified because I have this disability. I want to feel included. I don't want you making special accommodations for me. I want to be in a group setting. Yes, you may see my physical disability, but I don't want that to be a limitation in terms of how I can achieve, my academic success. So I think it's interesting to know, I think they pointed out, but they don't give us no solutions. And I think that's where I don't feel frustrated about it. I just feel like this is a great essay. Now, if you see it for what it is, help us to actually alleviate what these issues are for our students. So that way we have a plan of action. We know that, okay, I am moving in the right direction, that is going to make my students feel included in terms of that interaction in class with their peers, with me, as they move through their experiences as a college student.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, a lot of that. I agree. I don't like to either directly reach out to the student or to require them to reach out to you can create that type of situation. I think that more and more I have just been trying to consider, how can I just generally build a course, right? So they talk about universal design principles, but how can I build a course in a way where I have, reduced barriers and created these more equitable learning environment, right? And that's sort of the goal. So rather, a small group work, right, is a mainstay of active learning. And yet, since it's become much more used, we also know the problems with it. So rather than, asking a hard of hearing student or a neurodiverse student or a minoritized student to reach out to me and let me know that they're having trouble in their small group, I need to be forward thinking and think about, how do I structure a small group so that they don't need to reach out to me? And then on the flip side, how do I also create an environment and a culture and an instructor-student relationship where if something is happening that I haven't anticipated, because I am human, that they're comfortable reaching out to me in that type of instance. Because I agree, nobody wants to walk up, you don't want to walk up to anyone and be like, hey, how's it being deaf and being in this group today? Is it working? Right? Like, nobody wants that. So what do I need to do to prevent that? And yeah, so that's on me to find out more about universal design and inclusive teaching and those types of things. But yeah, I think, sorry, one more thought that I just kind of keep trying to peddle everywhere I go. I'm gonna peddle it here too. Is this paper is low on action items. They do have some suggestions, but like you noted, what it really is a developing self-awareness and empathy. And I'm stealing that language from the Brian Dewsbury, Cynthia Bramey inclusive teaching article, because I know I was always jumping right into what sort of pedagogical choices can I make, right? But we can do harm with those choices if we haven't developed greater self-awareness and empathy. So I am trying very hard myself whenever I'm reading articles like this to be like, okay, its purpose is self-awareness and empathy, right? Its purpose is not action items. Okay, so I need to reflect on that and incorporate that into my own sort of brain. And be okay with that. Yeah.
So ultimately then, if we go back to the idea of the introductions, and again, as we had sort of zipped around in here, and there's the stuff in here about the laboratory spaces, which we haven't gone into details on, but I think we've hit some of the highlights of that in terms of what's accessible, how to make things accessible. The idea of how one could actually be more open in encouraging people to let us know when things are needed. And so you see the anonymous feedback in the right column here. And we'd already talked about how that kind of feedback approach could help in maybe developing a culture where this is expected, where people are going to ask these things. But Zach, you had mentioned about being more deliberate about this, and I think I agree in terms of my own thought process. What could be done? Maybe something written, like an index card the first day of class or something like that, that allows people privately, but still to let you know what particular access issues they might have, which would then allow you to make adjustments along the way, or right at the beginning of that, in that example. So does anyone do something like this to try to get a sense of other needs that people have in their class?
Yeah, I do. I have a pre, mid, and post learning assessment that I provide for my students, but it still allows them to give feedback in any form. If they feel that I need to know something, at least that way it's reaching me, and they don't have to have it in a conversation. They don't have to walk up to me and say, Ms. Burks, I need an accommodation. It allows me to be aware of if something is not being met for the student. Go
And
ahead,
that's,
Zach.
like you said, that's anything regardless. Okay. So just a general formative assessment strategy. Okay.
I've tried, particularly this year, I've developed, just like Katie was saying, a syllabus statement where I tried to allow for a more inclusive classroom, but I will readily admit I don't talk about disability. I don't talk about increased need for access. I mean, I tried to, I just didn't. So I think that there's a difference, and like I have the pre-class survey. If you need anything, I'm right here. I'm happy to reach out, right? But saying if you need anything, reach out is a lot different than saying what are your, do you have any like special, or maybe special is the wrong word there. Like, do you have any specific access needs? Access is really important because these reasons. Here's some situations that people might encounter that might be like barriers to access. Getting more specific about it, I think, would suggest to students that I actually care, other than, yeah, I'm just here. If you have anything, let me know, right? Because that's just so. It just like I just sort of toss. I mean, for sure, I toss it out there, but it doesn't seem like there's much like meat behind it, right? It's just me like throwing out some words, and which then puts a lot of onus on students. And so developing a more specific wording around access needs, talking about the fact that hopefully I understand some of them, right? Stealing some language from this paper, maybe even providing examples for what challenges someone might encounter, barriers to access, and then saying, what are things we could do to assist. I have to phrase it carefully, but I think that would be powerful. And I simply don't do that. Whoops.
Yeah. In addition to that sort of pre-semester piece that Mariana was talking about, I did it the last, oh gosh, year and a half, so maybe 3 semesters that I was teaching undergrads. Like I said, I haven't done them in a year and a half. I would also have a student representative from the class. So essentially, the idea being that if students are having issues, concerns, and I would sort of highlight like, it's going too fast, I'm having group trouble, I can't access whatever, the Canvas page is terrible, like whatever it might be, that they would have a student representative, so someone from our class that they could reach out to, and then that person would anonymously speak to me, right? And so I would explain this concept, and then I would ask students to volunteer themselves to be representatives. And if I got more than one student rep, I don't know. I think it only happened once. I think I just had them vote, or I just made them both student reps, I think. And then, so then these students were then comfortable with, obviously they had to be able to share their email, and right? Some sort of way of contacting them. And I will say that in those 3 semesters, I would check in with the student rep, like I checked in with them 2 or 3 times over the semester just to be like, hey, have you heard anything? But, and they never did actually get contacted. But what I also hope for is that it also, again, created a culture, a relationship that like, I want to know, right? And so you can just come to me, but also here's another route if you're uncomfortable talking to me. In addition to maybe a more anonymous format, where they're waiting to get a survey. In this case, they can just reach out when the problem happens. So yeah, so I did that type of student rep thing. It's a low cost thing, right? It really doesn't take time. But it's just another route for students to reach me. But I had small classes as well. And so students tend to get to know you, better. And so that may have been another reason they didn't really use the student rep. But I have been described as intimidating by my students before. So, which I don't really get. But, I thought, well, for those that are intimidated, here's a person. So anyway.
Okay. So I think we got some really good sort of ideas. And actually, this was a pretty neat conglomeration of people to come together for this conversation, because people have had insights or experiences that we haven't had in some of the other sessions. So thank you for your candor and for sharing these ideas with us. And again, we had this article because Carlos sent it to us. So if you guys have ideas or concepts or pieces that you'd like to see in future sessions, please send them to me. I am happy to introduce them into our discussion line. All right. Thank you guys very much.
Bye.
Thank you for the talk.
Have a good rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.